So President Xi really had a packed schedule there in the UN. I want to start with his first speech there at the UN. That was at the Sustainable Development Summit there. The big announcement coming out from that speech really was the South-South Cooperation Fund, right? $2 billion US. And China is going to up the ante to $12 billion US by the year of 2030. So first of all, how is this fund going to allocate it there? And how is this going to promote or generating inclusive economic growth? Let me start with Victor here.
Well, first of all, I think President Xi Jinping really raised a very important issue, that is the South cooperation. This is actually not a new topic. Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, for example, in their respective way, all talked about the South cooperation. However, now that the world circumstances have changed significantly, and China, even though China is still a developing country, it's already the second largest economy in the world, raising the South-South cooperation has new meaning going forward. And I think China wants to help other developing countries by contributing the resources as well as sharing with them the expertise and our modus operandi in terms of how to lift the people out of poverty, how to build up infrastructure, how to really improve productivity in many respects. And I would say that by providing the South-South fund, it will really enable other developing countries to share what China has learned over the past 37 years or so, and also get a good ride, if not a free ride, on China's experience. This is the mission of that fund, and I hope other developing countries will really take great delight in what China has agreed to offer.
Well, is this enough, Mr. Yang? What are perceived as some of the most needed things for those poorest developing countries, and what can China offer in this case?
Well, just like economics are always saying, resources are always limited. So the fund is always limited, no enough at all. However, China's experiences, expertise on the development are really valuable things for all developing countries. Look, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, China was a really poor developing country, even poorer than the existing many of developing countries. But now China has got successful experiences. So I think beyond the funds, experiences, expertise, especially some in wide range of knowledge on how to do, as Mr. Gao mentioned, how to develop infrastructure, how to develop education, how to reduce poverty in pragmatic ways. So I think the fund could play a role as a leverage to spread out China's expertise for various developing countries by common development. I believe the South countries, they say developing country, will get more status for the further development. So in short, China's initiative and the contribution by this UN actually input new momentum for the South-South cooperation that will bring about the more prosperous for all developing countries.
But the timing of this is that China itself is going through economic restructuring and the global economy is not at its best. So people are wondering, how can China fulfill that commitment while tackling domestic problem? Is a full plate here, Victor?
Well, financial resources is one thing, and but the other thing which is equally important is that even though China has gained a lot of experiences and many success stories over the past 37 years or so, China has also made our own mistakes. For example, environmental pollution, lower level of energy efficiency, etc. So what we can share with other developing countries is both our success stories as well as where we have deficiencies. And I think by promoting this South-South fund, China can really give the true story of the economic transformation in China, both on the positive side, but also in some cases on the negative side. So other developing countries, in their drive for modernization, globalization, and industrialization, urbanization, for example, no longer need to repeat what we in China unfortunately made mistakes in. So I think both on the positive side as well as on the negative sides, we can share our experiences with developing countries. In terms of the financial resources you talked about, I think this is basically just part of the finance which eventually will be made available to the developing countries, because eventually the total package will include money from this fund, but also financing from the commercial banks, and many private equity fund, venture capital fund, etc. may also be very much interested in moving to these countries, looking for better investment opportunities to increase the productivity and efficiency in many of these sectors in the developing countries.
Well, this is, of course, a big commitment, but you got to ask, what's in this for China, right? What can China get in this in return?
Let me put it by this way. On one hand, without the common development, any single country, including China, can gain the so-called sustainable development. In fact, the development, the theme of development has been raised for decades long. But in reality, the world, the international community has not been successful in this area. So why is that? One of the reasons is we have got a larger gap rather than smaller gap than before. Say some of country has developed quite well. Meanwhile, more countries developed quite poor with such a growing gap. Even the advanced countries began to suffer. So we are in the world, we are in the global village. So you cannot enjoy your successful development without getting the others developed either. So
right. But the reason I'm asking this is because, President Xi Jinping's announcement really was met with enthusiastic applause there at the UN. But in the country here, you're hearing different voices. People are wondering what should be taken as priority by the leadership. They're saying that this money could be put into domestic problems, like put into education, healthcare, and solve the poverty alleviation.
That's why I want to say, when we were poor, when we were at the low level of development, we received many assistances from outside world. At that time, for example, 40 years ago, we called for the developed country, the rich country, had the responsibility to contribute to help the poor countries' development. Now we are relatively rich. We got some resources. Then we return to the developing country. So that's what we've received. Now we gave the other countries.
Let's also take a look at how this is being received by the global stage. Now, let's take a look at global media. What are they saying about President Xi Jinping's UN speech? Now, his commitment to establish a 2 billion South-South cooperation fund prompted AFP to draw a connection between this and China's growing global role. Meanwhile, the BBC also zeroed in on this key commitment, saying that it suggested China's willingness to take on more responsibilities to go with this increasing power and influence. So my question here is, Victor, do you agree with them, what they say there, that China is taking more of a leadership role in this?
Oh, definitely. China is the biggest developing country and the second largest economy in the world. And in a few years' time, it's widely expected that the overall size of the Chinese economy will be ahead of the United States in many, many respects. So the global leadership role for China is increasing, and it's already a fait accompli. And I think other countries, including both developing countries as well as developed countries, are looking up to this leadership role that China may exercise increasingly going forward. Now, coming back to your previous question, I would say, philosophically speaking, by China helping other developing countries, it's not just charity, it's just not sacrifices, it's not just waste of very important financial resources. I would say by helping other southern developing countries, it is helping China in the fundamental sense of the word, because by helping others and sharing our experiences with other developing countries, China actually can benefit, mainly because the more development there will be in the other developing countries, the more business opportunities may be generated, and the Chinese companies, etc., may also have more business participation in these countries. So it's a win-win situation for
wanna
China
also
and
get
other
to-
developing countries.
Right. I want to also get to President Xi's other speech at the Women's Summit. Right. He really stressed the importance, the intricate nature of women's development and socioeconomic development here in China. He talked about how to promote women's career here in the country. So in reality, how's China doing on that front?
Well, Xi Jinping made an initiative about women development, or he raised the women issue as one of the key issues for the sustainable development because of two reasons. On one hand, China has got a lot of successful experience and expertise about that, especially since the Beijing Declaration was issued 20 years ago. China made greater efforts on improvement of women's social status and women's development. We've got greater success, and China wants to share the successful stories with the world. On the other hand, in general, women development remain be behind, falling behind the social and economic development as a whole. So that's why Xi cut to the point by saying women development should be at the same pace with the social and economic development. That is the key problems in the sustainable development. So under China's initiative of the Women's Summit, I think China has bring fresh air in this very challenging issue.
Right. And also on Monday, President Xi is about to give this huge speech addressing UN Assembly. He's about to talk about critical issues, illustrate China's stance, really. But my question is, can his message cut through to especially Western audiences? Because we have very different ideologies. We have a different understanding about democracy, human rights, the relationship between state and society, a variety of issues. So how can these differences be overcome?
Well, normally, there are many people who believe that the General Assembly discussions at the United Nations are basically just discussions. It's rarely get translated into actions or action plans, not only for certain countries which are directly involved, but especially for the global stage. However, if China really takes a very active participation in these major initiatives, and especially if President Xi Jinping, the top leader in China, really shows a personal interest and wants to be in the driver's seat to deliver all these promises, then it changes the landscape. I would say when China is fully committed to do these initiatives, not only by itself, but also sharing its experiences and coordinating actions with other developing countries and also with developed countries, especially on climate change issues. And gender equality is so important. If you look around the world, there are many, many places where the women's rights are being very much discriminated. So it is time for action. And it is very fortunate that President Xi Jinping is showing his personal interest in, is mobilizing resources in China to drive for deliverables. And I hope this will really change the general perception of the United Nations. A new vitality, a new sense of urgency, or even sense of crisis will be instilled into the framework of the United Nations. So the General Assembly discussions will no longer just be for discussions for discussion purposes. It will be very much followed with very well defined, very well executed actions.